Hi everyone, it's your friend Doris, the coder. Doris the video, funny. Doris the coder back with another video. It has been a while. I know it's been a minute since I posted. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If not, welcome back. Today's video is going to talk about the coding assessment. What prompted me to create this video is, I started my channel really to kind of pay forward investments that people have made in me, as well as chances, in an effort to make someone else's journey into this healthcare administration arena easier than maybe mine was. And share some of the knowledge I learned along the way. So I wanted to talk about the coding assessment because we had a really good conversation starter in one of the forums before that kind of went, it was interesting. It was, just to observe, it was interesting to see one of the results. And this came up again. What triggered this, I couldn't get the whole post in it, but what triggered this particular post is a person said they were looking for a work from home position part-time. And because it was part-time, they weren't really interested in taking a coding test. They just didn't want to take any assessments. They were too long and this and that. So first thing I want to talk about is red flags to look out for in your assessment. When you train for an organization, they create an assessment if they're really doing it intentionally. I agree that if you're certified and the assessment is not relative to the organization, I almost don't kind of fully understand why they do it, just because I know why I do assessments. I know why I've taken them and what the organization's focus was that gave it when I took the assessment. So a red flag when you're taking an assessment is it at all related to the position you're applying for? And sometimes you throw your resume out a bunch of places. Keep track to know who you're interviewing for and what kind of specialty that looks like. What specialty that is. I'll hyperlink another one of my videos that talks about interview tips and resume tips and interviewing tips. And in that video at about half mark, I talk about how you can prep yourself for a test, the coding assessment. But a red flag would be the assessment is not at all related to what they do. So let's say they're orthopedic and it's a bunch of EKGs and general diagnostic stuff that you don't see in orthopedic. It's like someone actually went online and downloaded some general assessment and gave it to you. That would be a red flag. That's a red flag. That's a lengthy assessment. You may not want to deal with that. That's your choice. We're all adults and we can choose that because it's out of line with what they do as a specialty. It could be part of new business, however, that they're bringing on. So you do want to do some diligence and ask some questions during the interview to get really clear on what the intention is. It also could be an indication of you working under a management that is not coding related, right? So that means they didn't have the skill sets on board to actually create an assessment that's unique to what they needed. So they just pulled something offline, which I think in the long run they'll learn won't be valuable because it's not related to what they do as a specialty. So be aware of that red flag. Also, I hate I have to say this, but there are people that are kind of trying to hijack and scam and hack your information, I guess. So there are a lot of organizations that post jobs that aren't real jobs, right? Because they want to get your information, your social, and all of your information. So be mindful of that. In that video that I'll hyperlink, it talks about how you can research the organization. So there are some questions you want to save for the interview, but as soon as you get the call, you want to ask questions like, what's the name of the organization I'll be working for? Do you have a website? Right? Because you should be able, everybody at this point has some kind of electronic footprint as an organization, and that'll allow you to do a little diligence. It's also smart when you come onto some of those forums and ask, has anyone ever worked for this company? Do you know, right? Because you might find, oh yeah, 10 people, yeah, we work there. It's a good company. Or, oh my goodness, the production is pretty intense. But yes, it's a real company. So that's some red flags to look out for. Let's talk about why these assessments are done, because in looking at this trail, I was surprised, and we've had these kind of things come up before. I think there is a disconnect between the coders with this view and the understanding of coding's relationship with compliance. A lot of the risks that we see coming out of the OIG and different payer sites when it comes to enforcement has to do with billing and coding. It's a risk area in healthcare. It's not just quality care and things like that. There are actually a lot of coding issues that come out of it. So when an organization is doing an assessment, What they are trying to find out is, how do you fit in my organization? Doesn't mean you're not a good coder, doesn't mean you can't code. It simply means, can you code for what I have? I have multiple specialties under my experience, and I've got to tell you, I'm of no use to someone in ophthalmology, right? I'm probably no use to folks in a lot path and lab, maybe, right? Because those are not areas that I deal with. Am I a certified coder? Yes. But if I got hired for one of those positions, there would have to be some significant training and understanding, or some kind of acquaintance. I'd have to acquaint myself with that, because it's just kind of not what I do. This is particularly more difficult for the new coder, because you're just kind of waiting, like, I don't have any experience, and how do I get experience if nobody will help me? That's a valid question, and it's a valid concern. So in the video I'll hyperlink, we'll talk about some things you can do to actually prepare. I would be very concerned with an organization that doesn't test you, because organizations have risk associated with your coding. And think about it, if the way you coded resulted in a physician paying multiple times what he or she ever got paid. So maybe you billed $50,000 in claims incorrectly. And in response to that, because they say, well, you should have known better, provider in billing it, who carries responsibility for what you do, although you're not totally absolved of responsibility. That provider had to pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars, or $500,000 or $1 million, because how many times did you generate that claim erroneously? There's risk there. So the coding assessment really shouldn't be looked at as a personal thing. One of these things they talked about, as well as the tests are so long, and it's an employee's economy, not employers. Well, I think that'll flip pretty soon, but I give her good luck with that kind of perception. I think it's a little different when we look at kind of the risk of it. But how long an assessment is, understand that if an employer has really thought this out right, and some of them don't, throw that out there, some of them don't think it out properly, but for an employer that gives you an assessment, the more specialties they have that they may have you code, potentially, the longer your assessment might be. I've been an author of quite a few assessments. For example, I worked for an organization that had 9 subspecialties. 9 specialties that they worked with, right? Can you imagine how long that assessment would have to be? So we would pull a little from all of the different specialties cases to see, can they fit anywhere, right? There's some redundancy when it comes to the steps in finding a proper diagnosis code that's used all over the book. But even some of the procedural steps we use in CPT, if you just follow some of those, can guide you. And then there are people who know certain specialties. So I might mix multiple specialties because I'm trying to fill for multiple positions. And based on how well you do, like, hey, this person really didn't do so good in this area, radiology, but they did really good in anesthesia. So maybe they land in anesthesia as opposed to radiology. If it's a practice that's a little more limited in their specialties, they would look for you to do what they do. And the timing of the assessment is always more generous than the actual production standards, because it's like dating, right? I want to see your best. I don't want to put you under the rigorous production standards now, right? Because I really want to see what is the quality. Smarter or wiser organizations are going to focus on your quality, because I can get your production there. It's easier for me to get your production there than it is for me to get your quality there. So if during the assessment the results aren't great, you're less likely to land that position, because you've told the employer that you kind of don't get their business. Now, I do understand there's a challenge, and it breaks my heart. It really is part of the motivation of me starting my YouTube channel, that there are organizations that are taking large amounts of money from people and are not preparing them adequately. I can really sympathize with the mindset of, how do you get experience if no one gives you, and I'm failing these tests. Unfortunately, the preparation for your coding assessment comes in your coding programs and how you train. I think I'll link that video so you can kind of connect to that. So if you're looking for a coding program, I have some things to kind of look out for so you don't end up with one of these programs or institutions that leaves you unprepared at the end. That actually comes prior to you joining. And if you have an organization that's willing to onboard and train you fully, and not test you at all, sometimes it's not even like worth it. Like it's a new line of business, nothing's yet developed, or it's something I'm willing to train someone on, because even if you're certified, I can tell you, I'm a certified coder. There is no prep really that I got for pediatric aspect of what I do in the specialty like cardiology. It's just too niche, right? So the exam can't prepare for that. And your examination for certification is multiple choice. It is to cover the principles, the steps, and the guidelines, and assess your understanding and application of those with some coding practice. But it is a little different than what you actually see in the real world, because we don't always get a code on it. Sometimes, right? We don't get a code on it. We have to code that from scratch and apply all the guidelines and rules and code it properly. So it's really important for you to, I think, kind of understand that so you don't get your heart broken and prepare well. So the timing, when we think about it, they may say you have a 4-hour assessment. It may not take you 4 hours. If you're more experienced and you know that specialty, you're probably going to go a lot faster. A lot of the timing of these things are set in a manner, one, for integrity, right? Because let's be clear, there might be some folks that might kind of skirt around and get someone to do a test and it won't be reflective of their true work. You can't fix integrity issues in people. Like, you can't write around complete integrity issues. So it's hard to really fix that. But the timing of it is really to take some of the pressure off, and also to allow you to show your best. That is what they're looking for in these assessments if they plan them well. And I know for coders, like this person that said, they know people have passed 3, 4, or 5 times before they could pass their certification. Once you're certified, they kind of don't care, but those are also people who might struggle. So what do you do in the interim? Again, I'll link my video to kind of help you with some of those tips there, but this is why I always encourage you to never stop learning, right? So there's probably going to be an interim in between when you become certified and when you work your first job. The question is, what are you doing with that time? What I love about the exam that they didn't always do with the exam when you passed it with the AAPC is they give you a breakdown of the areas and your score. So you know exactly kind of how you passed, or what your scores were when you passed. I think they're doing that now. So you can see that if you scored lower in an area, even though you passed the test, that might be a starting point for you. Because until you get landed into a position, you don't know what specialty you're going to land on. So how familiar are you with the coding guidelines that you've worked with? If it's been 6 months since I've used something, or 3 months, I might not remember all that. So how fresh are you staying in what's in the book? A lot of assessments don't get very high into the payer detail, because the payer detail is a little variant when coding exists in that area. Unless you say you're experienced, then I'm going to say, oh yeah, you're experienced. You work for ortho, you've worked with Medicare, you've done that, right? So I'm going to give you some cases to see if you're applying those rules that are unique to having that payer experience. But if it's just, hey, I want to make sure you understand my business, that's going to start with the guidelines that are in the book and understanding. So that video that I link here on resume tips and interview preparation, about halfway through that, 14 minutes and 12 seconds, I think, if you jump right to that if you want to, it'll have some of those tips of what happens when you get that call and what you need to do in the interim between getting the call for the job and not. Finally, when you think about the why, right? So you understand that it's really not a personal attack. I'll take you to this page here. This is the OIG website, the Office of the Inspector General. And they talk about the components of an effective compliance plan. One of the things they talk about is internal monitoring and auditing, and they also talk about training and education. Training and education, a job may train you on how to do it there. If they are willing to train you on how to kind of do it, period. I have an externship program. And with my externship program, I still require them to test. Well, why? Because I need to know, one, if I have the time and how much work this person's going to take to develop them. This is why starting with your books and going into those guidelines and affirming that is super helpful. Don't pass the exam, close your books, and never open them until it's time for you to take a coding test, because when you have to, or an assessment, or actually use it in practice, you may not remember everything that went into it. So one of the reasons that you're going to be not just coding tested, but audited. That's what triggered part of this. One of the people said here, I have to, and I can't find the statement now, they audit you every, quarter, and they're auditing you. Here we go. Yeah. It said, honestly, I agree. I mean, we already passed the main test. It's not necessarily an assessment for placement. If you don't hire, can you usually assess by looking at experience? No, you can't usually assess by looking at experience, because you may have done it somewhere else. But if that organization never had quality standards and never audited you, you could have been doing the work less than the standard that I would expect, or at a standard that would put me at risk. So I would still assess you. That's you trusting a person's word, and it's not a distrust. Trust but verify. The verification comes in the test. But then they said, but then how do people learn? I don't think it would be sketchy at all. More like some of the companies are actually willing to train from the looks of it, which is a plus. We test for a certification, test to get hired, then audits every quarter. So basically it's a test every day and quarter. When is too much, too much? Too much is never too much when you pull auditing into it, because things that are fixed break. And the more companies have to contend with, coming from the management side, the more I had to contend with production requirements and meeting my client demand, where maybe you had to raise the production requirements. That mean my team had to do more work, and what steps weren't being followed as a result of it, right? So I have to always be able to ensure that the proper steps are being followed. If most folks, just, as humans, if I think production is a squeaky wheel, I'm going to focus on production, and maybe I don't focus so much on quality. But in not focusing on quality, I open myself up to risk from a compliance standpoint. So there is a marriage between coding, billing, and compliance, because you are generating those claims. So you'll definitely see, as far as an organization with an effective compliance plan, they should be doing monitoring. They should be doing re-education. But it all starts with the assessment, so they see how much they have to start with. So if you've been part of those organizations where you're a little discouraged because you feel like you weren't adequately prepared and you don't know what some of this stuff is, you might want to check out my other video for how you kind of develop yourself. I've got a couple on how you can work to develop yourself. What do you know? What don't you know? Where do you need to work on? And hopefully it helps you. So that's just my food for thought on the assessments. And again, this is your friend Doris, TheCoder, and I'll see you in the next video.